First off, I want to thank you all for the amazing support you've shown to the podcast. If you find it difficult to gain and finish hours-long, 8 to 10 podcasts per week, please subscribe to Most Advanced Featured and Accurate Quick Podcast Summaries on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. You can start with free trial, which lets you listen all the podcast and later, just for the price of candy in most places. It will save you from spending 15 to 20 hours per week catching up. Here is a rundown on Andrew Tate Tells America. I'm back. The interview they tried to stop, featuring Andrew Tate by Patrick David.
Andrew Tate is back in the United States, and he's not holding back.
He recently sat down with Patrick David to discuss his return to the States and the controversy surrounding his arrival.
Tate was asked about his experience with the media, particularly a BBC reporter who he claims tried to grill him with hit-piece questions after promising to tell his side of the story. Tate expressed his disappointment with the reporter, saying she vanished after the interview and no one knows what she does for a living. The conversation then turned to Tate's arrival in Florida, where he was met with a statement from Governor Ron DeSantis saying he's not welcome in the state. Tate was disappointed in DeSantis' response, saying he caved under media pressure and failed to stand up for due process. Tate pointed out that as an American citizen, he's innocent until proven guilty, and DeSantis should have said that instead of promising to find laws he's broken. Tate also discussed the concept of the wrap-up smear, a tactic used by liberals to demonize conservatives and make their ideas toxic. He claimed that DeSantis fell for this tactic and failed to stand up for himself. Tate also criticized conservatives for being too quick to cannibalize their own, saying that an accusation is often treated as a conviction. When asked how he was able to return to the States, Tate explained that he was allowed to come back for personal reasons, but didn't elaborate. He did say that he's not afraid of being put in jail in America as he's done nothing wrong. Tate also offered to help DeSantis with marketing if he's willing to pay, saying that he's very famous and expensive. The conversation was wide-ranging and covered a lot of ground, but Tate's central message was clear. He believes that he's been unfairly targeted and that the system is corrupt. When asked about his thoughts on Ron DeSantis' recent comments about him, Tate says that he thinks DeSantis failed a competency test by collapsing in the face of the ABC and NBC. He also mentions that he's not scared of what DeSantis said, but rather thinks that he's not fit to run a country. Tate explains that he was allowed to return to the States because his case was dismissed in December, but the Romanian government kept his bail conditions in place. He says that he's been trapped in Romania for 3 years, giving them his life, reputation, and money, and that he's never been convicted of anything. He's frustrated that people are questioning why he left Romania when he's been dealing with the country's judicial system for so long. Tate also talks about the hate he's receiving from conservatives, saying that they don't like him because he's tall, brown, sexy, and rich. He believes that if he were fat and ugly, none of this would be happening. He thinks that people are picking and choosing what they want to believe, and that they don't respect due process. When asked about the charges against him, Tate clarifies that his case was dismissed in December due to procedural errors, but the investigations are still ongoing. He says that the Romanian court identified procedural errors, including false translations, illegal wiretaps, and disrespecting his client-attorney privilege. He asks if this is justice, and if it's allowed for the prosecutor to keep him locked up for 2 more years. Tate also talks about his bail conditions, saying that he's been allowed to leave Romania because the judge lifted them. He says that he's going to respect the Romanian judicial system and return to the country on the 23rd of March. He's not running from anything, and he's willing to face whatever comes next. When asked about potential help from Trump's camp, Tate says that he has no idea, but he likes to think that Trump might have seen the garbage and asked some questions. He believes that if Kamala Harris were president, he'd be in jail, along with Trump and everyone else. Tate also discusses the possibility of extradition from the UK, saying that he's not concerned about it. He believes that the UK is a fallen nation and that they're not even America's allies anymore. He thinks that the UK government is snakery and that they're not standing up for democracy and freedom. He's frustrated with the hate he's receiving, and he's determined to clear his name. He believes the UK wants to lock him up because he's seen as a symbol of resistance against communism, Tate claims that he teaches young men to think for themselves, which is why the UK government hates him. He also believes that the UK has fallen due to a lack of masculinity, which is why he promotes masculinity. Tate thinks that if he were to go to the UK, he would never get out, but he's not afraid of them because he doesn't operate from a realm of fear. He even believes that the UK government is trying to set him up and that he wouldn't stand a chance in their courts. However, he's not afraid because he doesn't trust the UK government with anything. Tate also talks about how the UK Foreign Office was heavily involved in his persecution in Romania. He claims that the UK Foreign Office was saying that he's a problem and that they need to take him off the internet. Tate believes that the UK government is trying to silence him because he's a threat to their communist ideology. When asked about his recent return to the US, Tate says that it was a whirlwind experience and that he's still trying to process everything. He mentions that he was surprised by the fanfare and that he didn't expect it to be such a big story. Tate also talks about how his haters can't stop mentioning him and that it's actually helping his brand. He believes that if his haters had a brain, they would stop talking about him, but they can't. Tate also discusses how he feels about being back in the US after 6 years. He says that it's a strange feeling and that he's still trying to process everything. He mentions that he was disappointed by his welcome and that he's not sure what to expect. However, he's determined to make the most of his time in the US and to continue speaking out against the UK government. When asked about his emotions, Tate says that he's not angry, but rather he's storing up potential energy that will be directed towards justice. He believes that the people who have wronged him should face justice and that he's not looking for vengeance, but rather balance. Tate also talks about his audience, saying that they're primarily young men between the ages of 16 and 30. He believes that his audience is diverse and that he has support from all around the world, including from women and people from different ethnic backgrounds. Tate says that he's never had any negative interactions with his audience in person and that most people seem to like him. When asked if he thinks his audience is primarily conservative, Tate says that it's fair to say that a very small percentage would be liberal. He believes that his audience is motivated by his message of masculinity and that they're looking for a leader who can inspire them to take action. One of the first individuals mentioned was Dave Portnoy, who had expressed his disapproval of Andrew's views and actions. Andrew responded by saying that he had spoken to Dave once on a podcast and had made a comment about women not being able to drive, which had elicited a strong reaction from Dave. Andrew also mentioned that he didn't know much about Dave, but he seemed to be jealous of Andrew's success and masculinity. Andrew also brought up the concept of organese, which he described as a kind of energy that people put into the universe when they think about or talk about it. He claimed that this energy was what gave him his success and good fortune, and that his enemies were actually helping him by giving him this energy. The conversation then turned to Ben Shapiro, who had also been critical of Andrew. Andrew responded by saying that Ben was a hypocrite who took money from OnlyFans, a platform that he had criticized Andrew for being involved with. Andrew also accused Ben of being a warmonger who advocated for people to go to war while he himself stayed safe at home. The host then brought up Megyn Kelly, who had also expressed her disapproval of Andrew. Andrew responded by saying that he had never spoken to Megyn before, but he thought she was a good person and he would be happy to talk to her. He also joked that he would teach her how to drive after their conversation. The conversation then turned to Josh Hawley, a conservative politician who had been critical of Andrew. Andrew responded by saying that he didn't know much about Josh, but he seemed to be a hypocrite who was trying to get attention by criticizing Andrew. The host then asked Andrew why he thought some conservatives had a problem with him. Andrew responded by saying that he thought some conservatives saw him as extreme and degrading to society, but he believed that he was necessary in the battle against liberalism and communism. He also said that he was a cultural force who had moved the needle in a positive way and that he was not a perfect person, but he was willing to do what it took to fight for what he believed in. Andrew also mentioned that he had a hard life and had struggled with many challenges, but he had still managed to become a successful and influential person. He claimed that none of the people who were criticizing him had experienced the same level of struggle and hardship that he had, and yet they were still trying to tear him down. Despite these challenges, he managed to turn his life around and become a successful entrepreneur and influencer. However, His past experiences have made him a target for criticism from conservatives who see him as a threat to their values. Tate believes that his life story is what gives him the impact he has, and that if he had a perfect, easy life, he wouldn't be able to relate to the struggles of young men. He's frustrated that conservatives are more focused on attacking him than on addressing the real issues facing society, such as war, corruption, and the decline of traditional values. Tate also points out the hypocrisy of conservatives who criticize him for his past mistakes, while ignoring the wrongdoing of others, such as Henry Kissinger, who was involved in wars and other destructive policies. He argues that he's being held to a different standard than others, and that it's unfair to judge him solely on his past actions. When asked about his views on women and relationships, Tate explains that he's not interested in traditional monogamy and that he believes in having multiple partners. He argues that this is a matter of personal choice and that he's not hurting anyone. He also points out that Elon Musk, who has had multiple children with different women, is not criticized for his lifestyle, while he is. Tate believes that the reason conservatives are so critical of him is because he's a threat to their values and their influence. He argues that he's been a force for good in the world, helping to wake men up and fight against the insanity of modern society. He believes that he's been unfairly targeted by governments and other powerful interests, and that he's been attacked for his capability and influence. When asked about his role as a father, Tate explains that he believes that the best fathers are those who are busy getting things done and providing for their family. He believes that his children will benefit from having a successful and influential father, even if he's not always physically present. Tate also argues that the decline of civilization is partly due to the lack of masculinity in men, and that men need to take responsibility for being providers and leaders. He believes that this is not just about fatherhood, but about masculinity as a whole, and that men need to be competent and potent in order to be effective fathers and partners. He argues that quality time is more important than quantity of time, and that his financial capability and influence allow him to make a significant impact on his children's lives, even if he's not physically present all the time. He compares himself to Elon Musk, who he believes can also raise multiple children effectively despite his busy schedule. Tate emphasizes the importance of intentionality and potency in parenting, suggesting that a focused and directed approach can be more beneficial than simply being present all the time.
Patrick David shares a personal anecdote about his own father, who was absent for much of his childhood, but still managed to have a profound impact on his life. David notes that his father's intentionality and focus on their time together made up for the lack of quantity. He also references a clip of Gene Hackman talking about his own father, who left when he was 13, and how Hackman still managed to become a successful actor despite this.
Tate responds by saying that he misses his own father every day, but is determined to be a better father to his own children. He emphasizes the importance of being a strong, influential male figure in their lives, and believes that his own children will grow up to be successful and influential individuals. He also notes that his children are being bred for war, and are being taught to be resilient and prepared for the challenges of the real world.
The conversation takes a turn when Patrick David asks Tate about his views on physical discipline, and whether he believes in hitting his kids.
Tate responds by saying that he believes in life, and that there is a line beyond which violence appears. He emphasizes that he does not believe in abusing children, but rather in teaching them boundaries and consequences. He notes that he would only use physical discipline as a last resort, and only if his child had crossed a clear boundary. He believes that this approach is necessary to prepare his children for the real world, where they will face challenges and conflicts. He believes in setting clear boundaries and consequences for his children, especially his sons. If they disrespect him, there will be repercussions. He's not afraid to admit that he would hit his kids if they cross the line, but emphasizes that this is not about being a psycho, but rather about teaching them discipline and respect. He explains that this approach is necessary because the world is run by violence, and his sons need to understand that there are consequences for their actions. Andrew's philosophy on parenting is rooted in his own experiences and values. He believes that his sons have a duty to live up to the Tate name and make him proud. He's heavily invested in their upbringing, micromanaging every aspect of their lives to ensure they become the best versions of themselves. He's not interested in making them happy, but rather in making them capable and strong. When it comes to his daughters, Andrew's approach is different. He wants them to be happy and fulfilled, and he's more willing to indulge them. However, he also believes that they need to understand the importance of finding a man who can provide for them financially and protect them. He's not opposed to the idea of his daughters marrying older men as long as they're taken care of. Andrew's views on marriage are also unconventional. He believes that marriage is not about romance or love, but rather about protection and provision. He cites the example of a king who can have multiple wives because he can provide for them all. He argues that a man's true obligations are to protect and provide for his family, and that this is what marriage is really about. When asked about what he would do if his daughter's husband was cheating on her, Andrew's response is surprising. He would advise her not to leave him as long as he's providing for her and protecting her. He believes that the benefits of staying in the marriage outweigh the costs of leaving, especially if the husband is wealthy and powerful. Andrew's perspective on marriage is influenced by his own experiences and values. He believes that men have a duty to protect and provide for their families, and that this is what marriage is really about. He's not interested in romantic notions of love and relationships, but rather in the practical realities of building a strong and stable family. In a conversation about his views on marriage, Andrew references a Twitter user named Devin Erickson, who explains that marriage is not about bouquets and anniversaries, but rather about protection and provision. Andrew agrees with this perspective and argues that his own approach to marriage is rooted in this understanding. When asked to summarize his views on marriage, Andrew explains that a man's true obligations are to protect and provide for his family. He believes that this is what marriage is really about, and that it's not about romantic notions of love and relationship. He argues that his own approach to marriage is practical and realistic, and that it's based on a deep understanding of what it means to be a man. This guy's philosophy was that the purpose of men was purely mating, and he would explain that to anyone who would listen. Andrew notes that this mindset has changed over time, and now men are expected to be more than just providers. He adds that he's taken this idea a step further by incorporating intentionality, accessibility, and love into his approach. Andrew emphasizes that money plays a significant role in this dynamic, as it provides the means to raise children and give them the best possible life. He jokingly mentions that if he can afford it, he'd like to have 20 sons and provide them with the best education and opportunities. However, he also acknowledges that women are not held accountable for their actions in the same way that men are. He believes that this paradox is damaging to society, as it creates unrealistic expectations and allows women to weaponize the legal system against men. He cites the example of a woman who can accuse a man of abuse or rape years after the fact, even if she had previously consented to the relationship. Andrew also discusses how the media and society perpetuate this narrative, often blaming men for women's actions, and ignoring the fact that women can be just as manipulative and deceitful. He notes that this paradigm is used to control and manipulate men, making them vulnerable to false accusations and persecution.
Patrick David asks Andrew if he's ever thought about debating on a public stage, and Andrew responds that he sometimes feels the urge to engage in debates. However, he's hesitant due to the potential risks and consequences of speaking his mind in a public forum.
Andrew also shares his thoughts on human trafficking, which he believes is often misdefined and misused as a tool to control and manipulate men. He argues that the concept of human trafficking has become so vague that it can be used to accuse anyone of anything, and that no man is safe from false accusation. He believes that this is a deliberate attempt to undermine masculinity and control men's behavior.
Andrew's conversation with Patrick David is a thought-provoking exploration of the complexities of modern society, the role of men and women, and the ways in which power dynamics are used to control and manipulate individuals.
Through his stories and arguments, Andrew challenges his listeners to think critically about the world around them and to question the narratives that are often presented as true. When asked about his intentions to run for Prime Minister in the UK, Tate made it clear that he's dead serious about saving the country he grew up in. He believes that the current state of the UK is a result of a lack of masculinity and the destruction of free speech. Tate thinks that the royal family was hijacked by therapists and psychoanalysts, which led to the downfall of the institution. Tate's views on the UK's problems are deeply rooted in his perception of the country's history and its former glory. He thinks that the UK needs a strong leader, someone like Trump, to fix the mess that the current government has created. He's willing to take on that role himself, despite the risks, because he believes that someone has to stand up against the oppressive forces that are destroying the country. When asked about his views on Islam and the Muslim community, Tate was candid about his experiences and opinions. He's been a Muslim for 2.5 years, and he's had his fair share of run-ins with the community. He's been attacked and criticized for his views on Islam and its role in the UK's problems. However, he's not afraid to speak his mind and call out what he sees as injustices. Tate's opinions on the UK's problems are complex and multifaceted. He thinks that the country's lack of masculinity and its destruction of free speech are major contributing factors to its downfall. He also believes that the Muslim community needs to take responsibility for its own actions and condemn the injustices that are happening within its ranks. It's clear that Tate is not afraid to speak his mind and challenge the status quo, even if it means going against the grain. As for his views on Keir Starmer, the current leader of the Labour Party, Tate is scathing. He thinks that Starmer is incompetent and evil, and that he's destroying the country with his policies. He's not afraid to call out Starmer and the rest of the political class for their failures and their attempts to silence him. He's not afraid to speak his mind and challenge the status quo, even if it means going against the grain. His opinions are complex and multifaceted, and they're sure to spark controversy and debate. He acknowledges that this perspective might upset some Muslims, but he's being realistic about the concerns of native Brits. Tate points out that crime statistics can be misleading, citing the example of black people in the US, who make up a smaller percentage of the population but commit a disproportionate amount of crime. However, he notes that black people are an integral part of American society, whereas the situation in the UK is different. Tate argues that the real issue is the disconnect between third world and first world cultures, with many third world immigrants bringing their problems to the UK. He cites the example of the Southport killer, a Christian from Rwanda who committed a heinous crime, and notes that there are many other cases of third world Christians committing crimes in the UK. Tate believes that the problem is not just about Islam, but about the failure of Western society. The UAE foreign minister has spoken out about the Islamization of Western nations, warning that they are allowing extremism to foster in their countries. Tate agrees with this assessment, saying that Western societies are being naive about the risks of extremism. He also points out that many Muslims in the UK are more extreme in their views than those in Islamic countries like the UAE or Qatar. Tate believes that every country has the right to preserve its culture and identity, and that the British people have a right to an England that feels like England. He argues that it's hypocritical to expect white people to give up their lands and cultures while allowing other groups to preserve theirs. Tate questions the official narrative of World War II, wondering if the story we've been told is entirely true. He suggests that the winners of wars often write the history, and that there may be other perspectives on the conflict that are worth exploring. This is not about advocating for any particular ideology, but about understanding the complexities of history. He cites the example of a girl who was put in jail for going after her attacker on social media, and notes that Keir Starmer and other politicians are failing to address these issues. Tate argues that white people are being replaced in their host nations, and that this is a problem that needs to be acknowledged and addressed. One of the main points he emphasized was the issue of double standards in the law, particularly in the UK. He pointed out that certain groups are being protected and covered up, while others are being held accountable. Tate argued that this kind of behavior is creating resentment among the native population and is a ticking time bomb. Tate also discussed the topic of multiculturalism and how it's not working in the UK. He believes that the key to a successful multicultural society is fair treatment under the law, but that's not happening in the UK. He cited the example of Dubai, where people from all over the world live together in harmony. because they're treated fairly under the law. However, in the UK, there's a double standard and certain groups are being given preferential treatment. Another topic Tate touched on was the replacement of the native population in the UK. He argued that if you let in a large number of people from third world countries, they will eventually outbreed the native population. He believes that this is a math calculation that should be done by leaders, but they're refusing to acknowledge it. Tate also pointed out that this is not just a UK problem, but a European problem as well. Tate also shared his thoughts on Islam and how it's being perceived in the West. He believes that Islam is not an excuse to break border laws, and that Muslims should respect the laws of the country they're living in. He also argued that Muslims should try to address the concerns of the native population, rather than just expecting them to be tolerated. The conversation also turned to the topic of conversion to Islam. Tate, who converted from Christianity to Islam, shared his thoughts on the differences between the two religions. He believes that tolerance is a double-edged sword, and that it's allowed Christianity to be mocked and destroyed. He also emphasized that his affinity with Islam is between him and God, and that he's not trying to appease every Muslim on the planet. Tate also discussed the topic of identity politics and how it's tearing society apart. He believes that people are throwing their rationality away in light of group identity politics, and that it's not just a religious thing. He cited the example of how Black people reacted to the George Floyd incident and how it was used to promote a narrative rather than finding solutions to the problem. He didn't hold back on sharing his thoughts, even if they were unpopular, and encouraged people to think critically about the issues at hand. He thinks that they don't think rationally or sensibly, and he tries to prevent that from happening. Tate attributes many of the problems in the UK to the arrival of third world individuals who have no plan to integrate into society, rather than solely blaming Islam.
Patrick David asks Tate if he ever fears what would happen to him if he were to leave Islam and become a Christian again.
Tate responds that he doesn't fear it, but acknowledges that it would likely be a problem for others. He emphasizes that if that's how he feels, then that's what he would say. The conversation then shifts to the topic of world peace, particularly in Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, and Russia. Tate believes that Trump was on the right track in bringing peace to the world, citing his efforts in stopping the killing between Israel and Gaza. However, he acknowledges that Trump isn't perfect and that there's still much work to be done. Tate thinks that the key to achieving world peace is to stop people from dying and to encourage leaders to seek peace. Regarding the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, Tate believes that Ukraine is being sponsored by George Soros and the European Union, and that they don't want to stop the fight. Tate argues that the killing will continue in a war that Ukraine cannot win. Tate responds that the Jewish question is a complex issue, and that he's willing to discuss it despite the potential backlash. He believes that there are people who blame Jews for everything, which is pathetic, but also acknowledges that there may be some truth to the idea that Israel has a significant influence over the American government. Tate argues that the American government should be aware of all influences, including those from Israel, and that it's strange that Israel's influence is not measured in the same way as other countries. However, he also thinks that it's irrational to blame Jews for everything, and that people should approach the subject with more rationality and nuance. He believes that both sides can have a point, and that it's essential to have open and rational conversations to find common ground and solution. He's not holding back on his opinions, and he's calling out the media for their manipulation tactics. Tate believes that the media is programming people's minds, making them slaves to their narrative. He thinks that people are too quick to react emotionally to news stories without analyzing the facts. Tate says that he's resistant to media programming and he's not afraid to ask questions. Tate thinks that there are ulterior motives at play and he's not buying what the media is selling. Tate also talks about how the media prepares the public for news, rather than just reporting it. He says that they soften people's minds to certain ideas, making them more receptive to their narrative. He uses the example of the COVID lockdowns, where the media created a sense of fear and panic before the lockdowns were even announced. Tate believes that the media is doing the same thing with people like him, creating a negative narrative before they're even arrested. Tate is also critical of the way the media is handling the Epstein case. He thinks that the media is only focusing on certain aspects of the case while ignoring others. He wonders why the media is not talking about his charity work or the dog shelters he runs in Romania. Instead, they're focusing on old jokes he made 10 years ago. Tate believes that the media is trying to control people's minds, and he's not going to let them.
Tate's conversation partner, Patrick David, asks him about the Epstein list, which was promised to be released by Trump and other politicians.
Tate thinks that the list is being held back by people with a lot of influence and money. He believes that whoever is controlling the list has a lot to lose if it's released, and that's why it's being kept under wraps. Tate thinks that the list will eventually be released, but he's not holding his breath. The conversation is a wild ride, with Tate calling out the media and the powerful people who are trying to control the narrative. He's not afraid to speak his mind, and he's not backing down from his opinions. Whether you agree with him or not, it's clear that Tate is a force to be reckoned with. He argues that the people who have the power to release the list, such as Cash and Pam, are likely being cautious because they know that the media will only focus on the most damaging names and ignore the rest. Tate also believes that the list is not just about justice, but about drama and attention-seeking. He claims that many people who are calling for the list to be released are not genuinely concerned about justice, but rather want to be involved in the drama and attention that comes with it. Tate also touches on the topic of polygamy and how it relates to the Epstein case. He argues that the push for monogamy in Western societies can lead to sexual repression and perversion among the elite class. He claims that men who are wealthy and powerful are often stuck in show marriages and are unable to express their natural desires, leading them to seek out illicit activities like those that took place on Epstein's island. The conversation also turns to the topic of the media and how it can be used to manipulate public opinion. Tate argues that the media is not always interested in telling the truth, but rather in creating a narrative that will attract attention and drive ratings. He claims that this can lead to a lying by omission attack, where the media focuses on certain aspects of a story while ignoring others.
Patrick David asks Tate if he thinks the names on the Epstein list will ever be leaked, and Tate responds that he doesn't think so. He believes that the people in power are too cautious and are aware of the potential repercussions of releasing the list. The conversation also touches on the topic of the young children who were allegedly flown to Epstein's island and subjected to abuse.
Tate acknowledges that this is a serious issue and that those responsible should be held accountable. However, he also argues that the focus on the Epstein case is not just about justice, but also about drama and attention-seeking. Tate offers a unique perspective on the case, arguing that it is not just about justice, but also about drama and attention-seeking. He also touches on the topics of polygamy and the media, offering insights into the ways in which power and influence can shape public opinion. He's diving into some of the most pressing issues of our time, from the West's approach to monogamy to the death penalty for drug dealers. According to Andrew, the West's emphasis on monogamy is actually contributing to the problem of pedophilia. He argues that men's natural inclination to seek out multiple partners is being suppressed, leading some to seek out younger and more vulnerable partners. Andrew believes that if men were allowed to have multiple partners, they wouldn't be as likely to engage in pedophilia. He points out that in countries like South America, Russia, and Thailand, where men are more likely to have multiple partners, there is less of a problem with pedophilia. He's not saying that monogamy is the sole cause of pedophilia, but rather that it's a contributing factor.
Patrick David chimes in, joking that if men were allowed to have multiple partners, they wouldn't need to resort to pedophilia.
Andrew agrees, saying that it's all about giving men the freedom to pursue their natural desires. He also mentions that there's a peer pressure element at play, where men are encouraged to engage in certain behaviors in order to fit in with their peers. The conversation then turns to the topic of the death penalty for drug dealers. Andrew argues that it's a solution that could work, citing the examples of China and Singapore, where the death penalty has been effective in reducing the drug problem. He believes that the threat of the death penalty would be enough to deter people from becoming drug dealers, even if it's not actually carried out.
Patrick David points out that there are some flaws in this approach, such as the fact that it could lead to innocent people being executed.
Andrew acknowledges this, but argues that it's a necessary evil in order to protect society as a whole. He also mentions that there's a blackmail element at play, where powerful people are blackmailed into engaging in certain behaviors in order to avoid being exposed. The conversation then takes a turn, with Andrew discussing his own experiences with the law and how it shaped his views on law enforcement. He argues that the West's approach to law enforcement is too focused on individual liberty, and that sometimes it's necessary to sacrifice some people for the greater good.
He points out that countries like Japan and Romania have different approaches to law enforcement, where the focus is on maintaining order and stability, rather than protecting individual rights. The conversation turns to the topic of diplomacy, with Andrew and Patrick discussing a clip of Zelensky and the president together. He argues that leaders need to be more respectful and diplomatic in their interactions with each other, rather than resorting to name-calling and aggression.
Tate believes that Zelensky's behavior was a result of being told by European elites that Trump is against the war and that he needs to stand up to him. However, Tate thinks that this approach backfired, as Zelensky's nervousness and incompetence were on full display. Tate also pointed out that Zelensky's actions were likely influenced by his addiction to cocaine, which he claims is a well-known fact. He believes that Zelensky's behavior is a result of being under pressure and feeling like he's in a desperate situation. Tate also criticized the European leaders, saying that they are femme-centric and lack masculine leadership. He argued that the only way for Zelensky to have been kept safe would have been for America to have negotiated and bargained for his safety. The conversation also touched on President Trump's comments about Keir Starmer, where he praised him as a good person and a good leader. Tate believes that this is because Keir likely agreed to everything Trump wanted in their private meeting, and that Trump is a carrot and stick kind of guy. Tate also discussed the idea that Europe is run by femininity, and that this is a problem because feminine leadership is driven by emotions rather than a sense of obligation. He believes that this is why European leaders are unable to make promises and stick to them, and that this is a major weakness. He believes that Europe needs to come to its senses and get in line with Trump's imperatives in order to avoid this fate. He thinks that Europe is collapsing because of a lack of masculine leadership, and he's not impressed with the current crop of leaders. He says that even the strongest leader in Europe, Giorgia Meloni in Italy, is still not enough to save the continent. He's also not a fan of Justin Trudeau, calling him a real man in a sarcastic tone. Tate thinks that Trump is a great president and exactly what America needs. He loves how Trump thinks outside the box and comes up with unconventional solutions to problems. But Tate isn't just a fan of Trump. He's also deeply concerned about the state of Western society. He thinks that the woke mind virus is still a major threat, and that our enemies are plotting in the shadows, waiting for their chance to strike. Tate also has some strong words for his critics, particularly those who have accused him of being a sexual predator. He says that this is just a tactic used by his enemies to discredit him, and that he's innocent of all charges. He's also not impressed by the media's coverage of him, saying that they're just trying to smear him and make him look bad. Tate talks about the red pill community and how it's been affected by the recent scandal involving Destiny, a popular streamer who's been accused of cyber-sexual harassment. Tate says that this is just another example of how hypocritical people can be, and how they're quick to judge others for things that they themselves are guilty of. He's not surprised that Destiny has been accused of this, given his history of attacking others and being a blue pill guy. Tate also addresses the webcam controversy that's been used to attack him in the past. He says that he did help a girl create an HTML profile for her webcam studio, but that this was just a business arrangement and not anything sinister. He's frustrated that people are still bringing this up years later, and that they're hypocrites for consuming porn while judging him for his past actions. He's not afraid to speak his mind and tell it like it is, even if it means ruffling a few feathers. He loves the attention they bring, and he's not afraid to say it. In fact, he thinks they're making him more famous and richer by the day. He's the main character, and they're just unpaid employees, analyzing his every move and trying to take him down. But no matter what they do, they can't stop him. He's still going to be more well-known, more successful, and more unapologetic than they'll ever be. And as for his haters, he thinks they're just pushing his brand, making him sound like the coolest guy on earth. He's not afraid of them, and he's not going to let them bring him down. In fact, he's grateful for the attention, and he's happy to give them all the ammo they need to keep on hating.
As he puts it, he's tall, brown, rich, sexy, and rocking a Patek Philippe. What's not to love? As the conversation comes to a close, Patrick David asks Andrew Tate for his final thoughts.
Andrew Tate takes a moment to reflect on the hate he's received, and he hopes that his haters can find a way to heal and move on. He thinks that dedicating your life to someone who doesn't know you exist is a pretty miserable existence, and he prays for those who are consumed by hate. He also emphasizes the importance of respecting due process, even for those we disagree with. And to his conservative critics, he offers a surprising analogy. He's like Batman, the bad guy who fights the bad guys. And sometimes it takes a bad guy to beat the really bad guys. Andrew Tate's message is clear. He's not going to let his haters bring him down, and he's going to keep on being himself no matter what. And as he signs off, he leaves his audience with a lot to think about. Is he a hero, a villain, or something in between? One thing's for sure, he's not going to be ignored. Thank you for tuning in. Please click follow button. And just remember, subscription is only £1 or $1 per month. Leave a comment or review. Until next time, happy listening.